All right, we hope for this to be our final video tutorial on the first assignment, our fantasy landscape. All of our components are in, all of them are cut out, all of them are adjusted for light and color to match. What we need to do now is try to bring everything together with a finishing technique called a texture fill. And once we're happy with that, it's like layered glass over the top of everything. Then we'll find the cropping to get our finished composition. I'm going to turn off my sketch underneath so I can see a little bit more clearly what I have. And we'll be done. If you want to get a sense of what your cropping might be from the beginning, we can actually make a new layer on top of everything and use the rectangular marquee to draw a cropping box. This is different than using the crop tool because we're just getting a viewfinder right now. And then I'm going to select the inverse, which is everything outside of that rectangle, and I'm going to do Edit Fill with 100% white. I use Edit Fill instead of the paint bucket because this way I'm certain it's 100% white, not slightly off-white or anything else. So I know this won't print. Now that looks like it's cropped down my image. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. And I can check all of my edges and make sure that that's a nice composition. But it actually didn't. It's just a floating layer on top of everything else. But that might be nice as I start finishing these things off. Now for all of these textures that I pulled, I'm going to pull them on top of that layer. And I'm going to start playing with them, maybe starting with this one. So this is how a texture fill works. It's called a texture fill because you want it to fill your entire image. And this is a bit of a stretch, trying to make this icy tundra image look like it's underwater. So the basic premise is once you find a texture, this is a lot of little contrasted details that are going to be hard to work with. But then you just take the opacity down so that those colors mix with everything. Okay, and you can kind of start to see how it works. Now, opacity is one tool you have, but you also have what are called blending modes. And instead of just being 100% normal as a layer, if you choose a blending mode like overlay, it will transpose the two together, kind of like a double exposure in photography. And you start to see how that really helps with the rocks and with some of these textures down here, but you might also see how it really changes the lighting and the coloring of this background. So without it, it looks like that. With it, it looks like this. And then, of course, you can play with the opacity of the layer when it's in a blending mode. So that starts to make it look a little bit more interesting. There's some weird things going on, though. There's like grass growing out of the top of that mountain. Other ones I like are soft light, pin light. These are all good blending modes to experiment with at different opacities. Now this is another trick I like to do. So once I have it at kind of a low opacity and I see, okay, all of that's working, but there's some elements I want to bring out stronger, then I'll use my lasso and on the texture overlay layer, like on this stuff here, all the stuff I want to be more opaque, I'll kind of lasso around it, all the stuff around the bones, and I'm going to duplicate just that part of the texture layer. And it will deepen it. And then I can treat that at a different opacity or even at a different blending mode. So maybe I try soft light for that one or pin light. And then I work to erase out the bones. So these are tricks we can play. Now in this way, your texture overlay can really become a major part of your composition. It can add content, like I'm actually adding kind of sea floor ingredients to my composition here. And maybe I shouldn't treat these bones quite so much, because they should feel filled with algae and all the stuff that's underwater. And maybe I should even bring out some of these plants a little more. By duplicating them yet again. And by taking their opacity up. Now there are other blending modes as well. There's darken, there's lighten. So I'm going to use the darker color for that and let all of those kind of show through. So we can actually add a lot of content. Do the same thing over here. Select around this big kind of sea bush. Actually, let's get the bones in there again. Duplicate it, bring it to the top. Play with it more straight. I can even kind of play with adjustments on it, so we can deepen its darks, lighten its lights. Use the magic wand to get rid of a lot of these extraneous background elements. And then play with the eraser and opacity. And fit it into our composition. Okay, now it's all starting to work okay. One problem with it might be that this is kind of looking underwater. None of this is yet, so we need more texture overlay over the whole thing. So that's why I might go to these other textures, like this. And you can shrink it and size it any way you like. And then I can move my cropping mask over all of it. And I can play with blending modes. And just keep working with it until it starts to feel like everything is underwater. Well, pin light works pretty well there. Thicker opacity. I can use dodge and burn. I could flip the texture, so transform it, control click or right click, and then say flip vertical. Yeah, that's pretty nice. So I have these options. And I'm getting a little bit of that water surface texture at the top, but maybe I feel I need more. I can just keep layering textures upon textures. And because they're texture fills, you don't need to worry about them being too distorted. We're going to distort these just a whole lot because we're just using them for their colors. Now maybe underwater isn't really what we want. Maybe we just want a hint of it. It's a dramatic difference, but I don't know if it's one I particularly like. So I might just take some aspects of it But let's find another texture fill that maybe might be more appropriate to this. And how do we find textures? Well, we go to a Google image search. And the beauty of texture fills is because we're using them so faded and so soft as an atmosphere, we don't need to worry about them being super huge resolution. So I'm actually going to look up Ice Storm texture fill. That's pretty specific, but I'm curious what it will give me. I look at images, and I'm going to find lots and lots of pictures, but the ones that I'm going to be most interested in using are things that are just things like clouds, mist. This is a close-up of ice. Could be interesting. Can make it look like the lens is frosted over. Ooh, this is pretty. It can be stretched. And then let me look for some. This is interesting too. So these are all ice textures. I'll save those to the desktop just for the time being. Remember, I'm right-clicking and opening them on their own, but I'm not limiting them to only large images because it doesn't actually matter much. These are just helping to bring my colors together, give a little bit more texture. That's not going to work so well. All right. And now let's look for something a little bit softer. So let's see, sleet. Oh, that's nice. So a lot of times designers and digital artists will share texture fill resources. And then we're just going to bring them in as smart objects. So the easiest way to do that is to just click on them, drop them right on top, size them right there. You get a built-in transform box. And then right-click on the layer and rasterize it so you can modify it. So in this case, I might warp it, push that sleet and ice around a little so it doesn't look so vertical. Okay, and now we use it as a texture fill. So how do we do that? We take its opacity way down, see what that does to our image. I'll put my box over the top and maybe play with some blending modes. So what does overlay do here? Yeah, it makes it look like there's some snow in the air. It's breaking up the sky in a nice way, stapling the light. Let's try soft light. Gives a little bit more visual information to all the colors. I like what it's doing in the ice here. Just awakening it a little bit, making it look not quite so clean. Pin light. Pin light. Now that's pretty cool in some areas. You see how it looks like it's kind of dusty and kicking up around the clouds. So maybe I'll use a few of these. So I'm going to use soft light first, and then I'm going to make a duplicate of it, and I'm going to switch it to pin light. But now that it's in pin light, I'm going to take a big soft eraser. Even going to try a higher opacity. And I'm going to erase it out like mist. So maybe at a lower opacity. But especially in the foreground, I want it to be a little bit sharper. So just knock some of that mist back. But here in the background, I don't need everything to be super sharp. I can use it especially to hide things that aren't the best transitions. Always hide things with an organic texture. And you'll see this done all the time in fantasy landscapes and video games to make things look better. And if I feel it needs even more, I can always, like I showed you before, kind of select a certain area I think it needs more texture and then just duplicate it into that area. Merge all those together so I can play with it. Woohoo. And now